Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. I would like to first set the context for the next 1 hour of your time with us. In a moment, I will introduce you to our esteemed panelists and moderators of the session. I will also provide a brief intro about Happiest Minds Technologies. Sushmita Shankaran will discuss the topic of the day, disparate leading solutions or unified IAM solution, and which one is better choice for your organization. She will then hand it over to Colin Duffy, who will walk us through Hitachi ID's IAM suite. While Carolyn will be making a note of all your valuable inputs and questions, which our speakers will address during the Q&A session. Therefore, do not forget to raise your doubts across in the Q&A window as and when it arises during the talk. Stay with us till the end so that we can sign you up for an exclusive demo and assessment with us for your organization. Moving on, I will quickly introduce myself. My name is Kalyani. I will be one of your moderators for the session today. I head the global marketing for infrastructure management and security services at Happiest Minds Technologies. I love traveling and spending time with my family. With me today, I have Carolyn Evans, who's the marketing manager for Hitachi ID. Carolyn has 15 years of experience in the field of marketing and loves exploring the world. She is a budding pottery artist and loves expanding her knowledge about brewing craft beers. Our speaker panel today has Sushmita Shankaran, who heads the IDAM practice of Happiest Minds Technologies. Sushmita comes with nearly 15 years of experience in the IT industry. Currently, she plays a very strategic role in defining secure and robust IDAM roadmap for organizations like yours. She's an artist in her spare time and loves to sculpt, mural paint, and write. Mr. Colin Duffy is Senior VP for Sales and Channels at Hitachi ID, and he comes with nearly 14 years of industry experience. Colin played a very crucial role in expanding Hitachi ID's global partnership, which has accelerated their digital transformation. When he is not working, he loves spending time with his family, running, golfing, and traveling. Before I hand over the stage to Sushmita, I would take a few moments to introduce Happiest Minds Technologies to you all. We are a next-gen digital transformation, infrastructure security, and product engineering services company. We were launched in the year 2011 by Mr. Ashok Sutta, a serial IT entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in global IT industry. Currently, we are spread across 16 cities, 8 countries, and work with 170 customers. What you see on the screen are some of the accreditations we have bagged over the years in the race to become one of the leading IT service providers from India. With that, I welcome Sushmita to take the stage and start her presentation. Hi, Sushmita.
Hi, Kalyani. Thank you so much for the glowing introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. So before we move into the crux of the matter, right, whether a disparate IAM solution is better or whether a unified IAM solution is better, I'd like to touch upon a few important aspects in the IAM space. So if we look at how IAM has grown or how the IAM has evolved over the period of years, right from 2000 to going forward, the journey has been very interesting, and rather than just interesting, it has been exponential, if I might use the word. Excuse me. So in the identity management space, you have seen the focus shift just from workforce to embrace the consumer IDAMs to embrace the consumer IDAMs and rigorous identity analysis and analytics to be at the very crux of the solution deployment, and which will also help you to predict the toxic access combinations, so on and so forth. Privileged access management has also made this growth in leaps and bounds from the humble agent-based Windows or Unix-based, the admin credentials, to now that we see it as a full-fledged solution where it can be deployed in distributed architecture or in hybrid mode, where it is addressing requirements such as embedded credential management, threat analytics, and also the endpoint privileged access management. The roadmap has been extremely interesting, and what has changed the entire spectrum of the identity access management would be the introduction of IDaaS, which has just changed how the cumbersome IAM projects are being looking forward to. So earlier the deployment cycles were longer, and now we are looking at much shorter deployment cycle, and even the workforce which is managing these solutions is being changed. Right. Now, moving forward to what holds in the future roadmap, right? So that is where that is the area of interest right now. So we have exciting technologies like the blockchain IAM, where self-sovereign identities and the IPFS protocols is being used to secure the data storage, or we talk about identity as microservices. So all of this there has been a lot of growth and a lot of enhancements in the field of IAM from where we started. While we are talking about the IAM evolution, moving forward, the other end of the spectrum is where we look at the journey, right? Where the breaches or the ones that we are seeing these days. So we have the Trend Micros or of the world, or the bigger names such as the Canada's biggest financial services, which went into a breach of 4.2 million of its members got affected. So what is common across all of these is one single common thread, and that is that the insiders were responsible for these attacks. I wouldn't say that it was because of some malicious intent, but it could be something as harmless as being careless about it. So all of these, the breaches that we spoke about led to great, not just revenue loss for the organizations, but also in terms of the brand loss value. So when we move from the evolution and to the ever-changing threat landscape, what are the analysts talking about, right? So 45% of the data breaches that has happened last year, as per the Verizon report, it says that 45% has been because of hacking. That is fine. So there is no surprise about it. We all know about it. But what is surprising and what is interesting is that 80% of those hacking related breaches were caused by the stolen or compromised credentials. So this is the magnitude of exposure that we look at if we do not have a proper IAM solution in place. This is only in terms of hacking, but on the right side of the screen are mentioned a few additional risks in terms of the privilege creep that follows because the identities over the life cycle, right? If the older accesses are not removed, it tends to become a super admin account in the environment. And if that gets compromised, the entire security of the enterprise gets compromised. Or the complicated identity lifecycle management is the entire cycle in case you do not have a IAM solution in place, so on and so forth. And also failure to adhere to regulatory compliances becomes one very important factor if we do not have an IAM solution in place. So be it SOX compliance or we are looking at the PCI DSS, or even if we are looking at the GDPR. So each of these articles in GDPR, if you look at from Article 5 to 32, or in terms of SOX compliances, if you're looking at sections 404 or 302, each of these call upon necessary permissions or necessary security to be in place in terms of access rights and privileges granted to the individual. That forms the crux of any of these. Moving forward is what the analysts are saying overall on the whole, right? In a nutshell, what the analyst has been saying is that a robust identity and access management solution is no longer just a tool to achieve compliance. So that is what used to be historically. So it is to just be a tick mark in your entire portfolio that okay, I have an IAM solution, now I'm complying to this. So seeing the rapid advancement that in the IAM space that we are seeing, it is moving from just being that one single inconsequential tick mark to being a very integral part of your entire cybersecurity portfolio. To the right side is where I have jotted down a few of the sub verticals within the IAM space. So we have the identity access governance, access management. All of these we will be discussing a little bit more in detail as we go forward. Now, reaching to the point of what is an IAM solution and what is a disparate IAM solution, right? So we saw, as I said, we will look at all those verticals once more in detail. All of those verticals in terms of identity access management, access governance, privileged access management, all of these solutions, if it is provided by a single platform to manage and govern the accesses across your diverse set of users. Diverse set of users would be your employees, your non-employees, your contractors, your consumers, and the applications that these your workforce or your consumers workforce is addressing or accessing. And these applications could be on cloud, could be on premise. Not only this, but also accesses to the critical accounts like your Windows servers, your Unix boxes, your switches, databases, all of that, the whole gamut of resources that you have in your environment. So if it is a single platform that is allowing you to govern the access across this diverse set of the resources portfolio, that is when we say that it is a unified IAM solution, as opposed to a disparate IAM solution, wherein for each of the requirements, that supposing the requirement is only for a single sign-on, or if it is only identity and access governance that we are looking at, you just need to go ahead and do you're more interested to avoid the toxic combination of roles that could pop up in the environment. If that is the case, then separate solutions, if it is being used, then that is when we say that it is a disparate IAM solution. So typically what it would mean is in unified solutions, we would have the larger chunk of modules such as the identity and access governance, access management, and privilege access management. Whereas when we look at the disparate IAM solutions, it is more, there will be overlapping features. So if you look at, the IAG solution and an IDaaS solution, then there would be instances wherein the provisioning, deprovisioning, or the user lifecycle management will be handled by both of them. Or when you are looking at multi-factor authentication and some other module, you would see that there would be features that are overlapping between two different modules. So this is considered to be one of the drawbacks when we go ahead with a disparate IAM solution. So in a nutshell, if I have to draw some examples from a real world scenario, I would say if for example, if you're setting up the interiors of your home, right, and you hire a designer who's going to design your home end to end. So that would be that. So you want the overall the overall home, the design, to be in sync, in harmony, so that one single person is responsible to ensure that this happens across all the rooms in your home, and the overall time and effort that is required to get this achieved becomes much easier, because you as a homeowner are talking to only that one particular designer, as opposed to if you decide to give away this or include the services of individual services of carpenters and designers for your say living area or for your garden, so on and so forth. So the designing, the execution, the overhead involved to ensure that the cohesive theme is there which runs around the entire home, that becomes the onus of the homeowner. So the entire the lifestyle, the journey of moving your house into a cohesive theme becomes much more complicated, as opposed to if you were going to go ahead with a designer, with one single designer who would take care of all of your requirements. So that is exactly what happens when we talk about a unified IAM solution as opposed to a disparate IAM solution. Moving forward to next few slides where we will discuss in detail about what are these factors that we should have in consideration or in mind while we are looking at these two solutions. Number one always is the cost. It is a driving factor, or it is a very important factor while we are on which solution to pick. So when I say cost here, there are two types of cost that I do. One is the license cost, which was for a unified solution always work better because of volume discounting and other logistics that are involved in it. Also, what many a times goes unnoticed is the cost of duplication of the underlying infra that is required for each of the solution if you go ahead with a disparate solution. So your IIM suite will be, if it is separate modules that you have in there, you would have to, there will not be a common database that will be used, or there is not even an option of that, or common series of reporting analytics that will be used in case you are going for a disparate solution. So that kind of, configuration level details or underlying infrastructure cost gets added into the cost of the overall owning the solution, or the total cost of the solution that we talk about. The next is the complexity. In complexity, again, there are two factors that we are talking about here. One is the complexity of design, and the next is the complexity of the implementation. Right. So when we go ahead with the disparate solution, as we discussed a little while earlier, there could be overlapping features, which will of course go ahead and make the design and architecture complex. So if there are, the IHE, if the provisioning features are provided by two of the solutions that you are going to pick, then you have to decide solution A and B, which is the one which will do your provisioning bit and which is the one which will go ahead and do your single sign-on bit, because there are overlapping features in there. So that kind of detailed analysis needs to be done. Also, the product vendors. So if at all the disparate solutions have been used and we are quite convinced in terms of this solution is the best in market and I would rather go with this solution, what sometimes go unnoticed is that there is excuse me, if there is product A, B, and C that is supposed to work as one cohesive unit, the integration capability of these two solutions becomes a overhead effort in terms of how will the solutions talk to each other. Will I get an end-to-end view? If there is an end-to-end view required, what is the customization required? What are the REST APIs available? Is there any out-of-box connectors available? And all of that overhead comes to the enterprise's kitty. It will no longer be the requirement or the responsibility of the vendor as is the case when we are going ahead with a unified solution. Thirdly is the maintenance part. Upgrades, of course, if it is a unified solution, it will be streamlined because the product vendors would be treating it as a solution as opposed to one particular module, right? So that will be pretty streamlined upgrades, and there will not be any surprises in terms of if I am going to go ahead and upgrade one particular module in my suite. It is definitely not going to go ahead and create some undesirable outcomes in the other modules, because that level of testing and study would have been done at the product vendor level. So that is not the onus of the enterprise. But when it comes to the disparate solution, upgrades of these separate solutions can lead to some sort of complications. It might lead to undesirable outcomes, which in turn will again, complicate the architecture, which in turn will again add to the effort just to get it back to the state so that it is functioning. Next is the effort part. Now, effort to maintain or administer a unified solution will any day be lesser than than the effort that is required to maintain a separate solution, because there is a risk of lack of cohesion, as I was mentioning in the real world scenario. It will not for it to come together as one single entity, there will be a lot of time, effort, and cost that gets involved. Next is the scalability part. With a vendor who is providing a unified solution, for adopting to the next module, it becomes fairly easy. What this means is, at this point in time, the business requires for a particular enterprise to go ahead and improve the user experience. So the requirement is only for going ahead with a single sign-on requirement. Like, for example, we did it for one of the IT services company that we were working with very closely. So at that point, it was just a services company. They did not have any products, and the requirement was very clear. They wanted a single sign-on. We suggested that probably we can do an entire IAM analysis study and see which is the best fit for the particular enterprise. And it was turned down, saying, no, we know single sign-on is all that is required. And at this point in time, I do not see any other challenges or why I would want to expand to anything else. I do not see that happening. So single sign-on is fine, and this is the solution we want to go ahead with. Fine. So that's okay. Went ahead, deployed the solution. Now, sometime down the line is when the IT services company expands, right? And they go ahead and acquire a solution from a healthcare industry, which is mandating them to go ahead and be a HIPAA compliant. That is when they realize that a privileged access management solution is required. And that's when we realized that at that point in time, if there was a little bit of analysis or study that was done earlier, we could have saved so much of effort at the later part of it. So as they popularly say, a stitch in time saves nine. So that's how it happens. So these few things become extremely important. Also, in terms of the knowledge transfer that has to be given to the team. Solution is ready, deployed, and then it is handed over to the operations team. There may be the younger team members or the L1, L2, L3 support. There again, a lot of confusion created because of all these overlapping features and complex architecture that has been proposed, which could be easily avoided if we can go ahead with the unified solution. And last but not the least is the roadmap. Unified solutions are typically provided by the industry leaders who have a very strong product roadmap. And they would also have a research and engineering team which is working closely along with the analyst and the market, who would find what are the trends that are new in the market, and what is the threat vector, how that has been changed, and what is the competition doing. All that kind of analysis and new features gets added. So they would have a roadmap in terms of what is going to be my 3-year roadmap, what is going to be my 5-year roadmap. Most of the organization out there also go ahead and publish it. So that kind of stability is what a unified solution will be able to provide, as opposed to a disparate solution where typically small, if it is the vendor that is providing only that particular feature, it will be a smaller vendor. Of course, they might be doing brilliantly in that particular feature, but the risk that is there at that point in time is that they are constantly at risk of a buyout or a merger. And so we are left with a solution in hand which is no longer being supported. So these are the factors that need to be kept in mind while we are looking for a unified or a disparate solution. And going forward, we will also take you through the entire gamut of other, logistics that needs to be kept into mind before we move into the actual procurement of the solution. So as we said, it will do your entire as-is analysis and your when you are going for a solution, decided that IAM solution is need. We know this is a disparate solution, and this is what the other solution will do for me. Now, how do I create a business case? The first part of creating a business case would be to go ahead with the as-is analysis. Know where you are, know what are your risks, know what is your business requirement, put together a strategy and a roadmap. And then when we reach on the solution definition phase is where these 3 verticals of functionality, implementation, and strategy alignment need to be taken into consideration. Each of these features, what falls under each of these is something that we have already touched upon. So that is not something that I would spend more time on, but this is something that we typically do for most of our customers, as I would be explaining in our next slide. Yeah. So this is for one of our existing esteemed customers who are, is of course largest multinational telecommunication company, which is headquartered in London. And something quite similar happened here as well, meaning that the organization started off their IAM journey with a set of disparate, solution leading IAM products to address their identity access management requirements, privileged access management requirement, the whole gamut of it. Halfway during the journey is when we realized that the complexities that are involved, and in terms of the architecture and all the other factors that we have discussed so far, all those integration challenges. So that is when the organization decided to take a pause and take a step back, and that's when we stepped in with the detailed analysis in terms of what are the challenges, what are the additional requirements, business needs, and then the product comparison followed. And that's when the Hitachi ID suite was proposed, along with the POCs and all the other nitty-gritties that are involved before finalizing any solution. And Hitachi was finalized for it. So that's where now we are in the phase 2 part of the application, ACL automation for them, where the application integration is happening with our connectors and custom connectors, and also a phased approach was put together in terms of after this particular phase, there is going to be the PAM rollout phase that has been planned, and for each phase, what is the expectation out of it, and what is the what is the outcome out of each of these have been clearly defined, and there is a clear set strategy out of it. So the value that was delivered out of this was the improved visibility in terms of who has access to what, which was not present while the disparate solutions were implemented in the environment. To explain in detail more about how the Hitachi ID, the solution works, what are the different modules involved, and the features, and so on and so forth, I would like to invite my esteemed friend Colin Duffy, who is a VP with Hitachi ID, who will now take over. Over to you, Colin.
Excellent. Thank you, Susmita, and thank you for everyone who has joined here today. I'll take you through Hitachi ID and our unified approach to identity and access management challenges. So just a little bit of background on the company itself and kind of where we've come from in our journey, just to kind of give you some context. We've been going at this for about 25, 26 years now in terms of developing, supporting, selling, servicing a suite of solutions in this domain. We started in 1992 as a security consulting company called MTech. The first product we released was in 96. That was around password credential management. And we've evolved into identity management in 2004 and privileged access management in 2007. And in 2008, we were acquired by Hitachi Limited out of Japan and rebranded as Hitachi ID. So effectively the same company, everything's built from the ground up. And we're now wholly owned by Hitachi Vantara in terms of the Hitachi group of companies. But I mean, suffice to say, we have a legacy, a long legacy tenure in the identity and access management space. We've built everything in-house. We haven't acquired any technology, and we've built everything off of one platform. So in the next slide here, I'll show you how the suite kind of hangs together with respect to the three kind of disciplines that we cater to. So we started in the password management domain for simplified sign-on, reducing call volume at the help desk. Obviously, that was very simple back in the mid-90s, and that has evolved considerably today. And we continue to add to this product in terms of roadmap, and growing into things like federation and more edge cases around credential management. And then identity management for us is the combination of the joiner, mover, leaver, automation, and the access governance, those two paradigms working seamlessly together. And privileged access management is around vaulting, storing, randomizing administrative credentials, passwords, and then brokering the access when needed. So the three solutions are built on the same code base, if you will. They all run on the same platform. While we certainly preach a unified approach, we don't recommend you do that day one. You can license each of these solutions and modules independently of themselves and grow into a suite or a program with Hitachi ID. So you could start in the password management domain and work your way across, or vice versa, depending on your priorities and requirements. And underpinning the entire suite is a connector library, which I'll shed some light on as well in the future slide here. So it's one UI, one UX, and the next slide kind of gives you that perspective of, okay, if I'm running the Hitachi ID suite, what does it look like behind the scenes? Well, it's one administrative user interface. You're not worrying about multiple different instances of different types of vendor technology. You're not trying to glue together different pieces of or different solutions. You can administrate the entire platform from one perspective. You can invoke the connector library, one connector that works for all three of those disciplines as well. And the nice thing to note is the way we license the technology commercially is very simple. For a password manager and identity manager, we only care about the number of users, and in the privileged access management domain, we only care about how many systems are we managing administrative access to or on. So you're not dealing with, well, which features or functions do I need to pay for? We do not a la carte the software by any means. So very simple, clean user experience from an administrative standpoint, and also maybe helping reduce some of the complexity and the overhead around maintaining, administering the solution from a training, knowledge base, transfer of skills. We borrow technology between the systems or between the solutions. So you'll see some of the identity management functionality appear in the privileged access management functionality, and vice versa in terms of securing credentials between different systems and accounts. So the next slide actually expands upon our connector ecosystem. So again, that kind of theme of one connector pack, if you will. So we've developed about 120 connectors over the years with our suite of software. So 25 flavors are Unix, for example. They're not all listed here, but we include all of these connectors out of the box, and we continue to add to our connector library and make connectors available to customers when it makes sense to do so. We have an extensible connector framework as well if we need to target anything that's proprietary or unique to customers and try and manage the cost associated with doing that. So it is quite a robust set of connectors. And again, you deploy one connector for the likes of mainframe or the likes of Active Directory or any of these systems, and you can leverage that connector for password management, identity management, access governance, privileged access management. You're not deploying multiple connectors every time. So that's something to keep in mind when you look at it from a unified perspective. And the next slide kind of just talks about our footprint within the environment and the flexibility of that footprint. So it is quite a simple infrastructure to deploy: a Windows server with a Microsoft SQL database server backend and a web server. So regardless if that's on premise, that's in your private cloud, or that's in a public cloud, it's the same infrastructure, it's the same solution, same performance. You're not losing any kind of features or capability by moving it out of your corporate network into a cloud environment. So it's quite transferable, and we have a lot of customers that do hybrid deployments where they have instances of the software on premise and instances in the cloud, and the architecture of the software supports a highly available real-time replicated environment, so that in the event you lose something on premise due to a network outage, you can immediately fall back to another location, and you're not having to promote anything to production. But the message here is that it simplifies your administration, your cost of ownership around the underlying infrastructure with respect to your identity and access management program. So from here, I'll jump into kind of some of the features and functionality that we bring to bear in each of those disciplines in a little more detail. So one thing to note and keep in mind as we go here, within each of these solutions that we offer, they are effectively a unified approach to that problem space. So in the password management domain, which has really evolved to more of a credential management problem space, we have various capabilities that you can bring to bear that give you an enterprise capable system around managing on-premise password management issues, like synchronizing your Windows password across multiple systems where perhaps they don't all leverage Active Directory authentication. So in the on-premise environment, you'll have a one password approach. You'll have a simplified sign-on, and then leveraging the Hitachi ID Password Manager solution as an IDP, you can then have single sign-on to the cloud. So for the user, it's one system for both, one user interface. We have multi-factor authentication support within the product, so you can pull in existing factors of authentication when authenticating to cloud-based systems. We have self-service. Obviously, that goes without saying, and certainly self-service is helpful for or more important for non-AD environments. AD is very trivial to do, but if you're looking at self-service for some of those edge cases, like being off the corporate network with a laptop and having to change your password, we can support you there. We have disk encryption, key recovery capabilities in a self-service capacity. We have assisted reset. So someone calls the help desk, you can give them access to the system. The analyst can use Password Manager to reliably identify and authenticate the user before resetting or unlocking their account. And then there's other elements of the solution around password policy control, password policy enforcement, mobilizing the system for enrollment, in reminding users, etc., and making it accessible through various different browsers, but also via our mobile app. We have an iOS and Android mobile app that you can take advantage of as well. So that's Password Manager, and that space has considerably evolved over the years, as Susmita referenced earlier in her slides. Then we get into Identity Manager, much more complex, but again, a unified approach to the problem of access governance and identity process administration. We've seen the market evolve from a governance first approach to more of an automation first approach, and that ties directly into what Susmita was referring to earlier. It's not sufficient to just tick the certification box anymore. We need to be able to proactively enforce policy and rules and roles, segregation of duty, toxic combinations. And we can't wait for the access certification round in a couple months to then clean up some of this problem access. So Hitachi ID Identity Manager marries the two together. We have ability to tie into your HR system in terms of joiner, mover, leaver process automation. We leverage the connector library, which I've alluded to. We can tie into physical assets such as tokens, smart cards, even modeling physical access in terms of badges, access to buildings, access to rooms within buildings are all capable within the identity management tool. So you can marry and unify that element of the problem space. We have introduced some interesting and unique capabilities around group management within the identity management tool. So again, unifying that into the system in terms of being able to create, update, and delete group objects. So not just putting people in and out of groups, but actually the life cycle of the group object, and being able to enforce policy around cleaning up groups in an automated process, being able to expose to the business the ability to request that a group be created, these people be in that group, these people have these permissions in that group, nested groups, and all of that as well that goes along with it. The workflow engine, the policy enforcement, the access review process, being able to review who has access to what, it's all there within one unified platform, and it runs seamlessly with the password management solution. So you can deploy those two together in terms of a end user focused deployment of Hitachi ID, employees, contractors. And then on the next slide, we can jump into the privileged access management domain. And for us, privileged access management, again, brings together multiple elements of the problem space: password vaulting, randomizing, single sign-on disclosure, being able to record sessions, all seamlessly integrated within the privileged access management solution. And then we're borrowing some of the functionality from Identity Manager in terms of the authorization workflow, in terms of access governance. We actually have access certification capabilities within privileged access manager. If that's where you started, you would be able to take advantage of that in your deployment. We have a unique model in terms of delegating to various business units the ability to manage and onboard and permission their constituents in terms of privileged access. So helping with some of the runtime administration of the solution as well. And then lastly, and certainly not the least, is non-human accounts. So targeting service accounts or application credentials, DevOps. That's also part of the solution. So, I mean, what you're probably seeing here is that Hitachi ID is quite wide in terms of its reach, but also quite deep in terms of its capabilities. And that's why the story of a unified approach has some merit when you have a vendor of this maturity in the market, able to bring all of this to bear in one suite of solutions that you can grow into with the likes of a Happiest Minds kind of navigating that path with you in terms of your roadmap and your delivery. So those are the three core products of Hitachi ID. The next thing in our process is really how do we bring this together for customers so that it is consumable, and we can reduce some of the elements that Susmita referenced in terms of risks. And what I mean by that is, as you deploy identity and access management or privileged access management, you don't want to be engineering any solution. You want to be configuring, not coding. And what we've done with Hitachi ID Bravura is effectively standardized implementations, standardized business processes into the software. And we're not force feeding this on customers. But what we are making available is these business processes in the form of soft-coded, pre-configured logic that you can invoke when implementing our software. Good example of one scenario would be every organization has to deal with a leave of absence or an urgent termination process or a name change process. I mean, these are part and parcel to every identity management implementation. So what we've done is made something that's extensible, it's fit for purpose, it's based on best practice, and then you can modify the process, you can tweak some of the outcomes without coding anything. So we've developed a library of these processes, and then we've wrapped them in what we believe to be logical, practical access management patterns. So we've done certainly one for the workforce environment, the corporate world, employees and contractors, and business processes associated with that model. We've one for higher education. We have one for the B2B world in terms of, managing business partners, business customers who need access to your systems and applications. So those models, if you will, are available within the administrative UI of Identity Manager, and our services team or our partner services team will leverage those models as they deploy our software based on the requirements of the customer. And we have customers that deployed the solution for internal use and external use. So they have multiple instances of Identity Manager, for example, but it's the same software. The skills are transferable. The administration is relatively the same. You're not dealing with multiple products to address those problem spaces. And the analogy we've always used is, why would you build a car from scratch? No one's going to do that. You're going to walk into the dealership. You're going to, kind of tell the dealer that you want a car a certain way with certain colors and certain tints and certain wheels, certain audio speakers and specs, and then you're going to drive that car off the lot and away you go. And that's really where we're coming from with respect to this Hitachi ID Bravura approach with our software. And the next slide kind of touches on what I've already kind of covered, which is the various different patterns that we can bring to bear, and the fact that we're adding more around privileged access, around healthcare, around customer-facing citizens, e-government, things like that. So that's a big part of our roadmap. We're not just developing features and functions, we're actually developing best practice around how you leverage that, and then giving that to our services organization, our partners, our customers to turn that on, invoke those processes, and reduce the complexity, the cost, and the time to value when implementing an identity and access management program. So I think with that in mind, I think we'll switch to why consider Hitachi ID in terms of wrapping up. We have a wealth of experience in terms of the market. Been doing this for 25 years, probably as long as some of the bigger vendors in terms of Oracle, IBM, CA, certainly more so than some of the niche vendors. We have a flexible deployment model. We can go anywhere, on-premise, in the cloud, a hybrid, that's not a problem. We have fantastic partners. We work with some of the best in the industry in terms of agnostic, capable of delivering roadmaps and assessments and leading customers to success through pragmatic deployments of these types of solutions. And just the fact that we have such great mind share within the company. I mean, the majority of our employees are over 10 years with the company when it comes to domain expertise and knowledge. So some of our customers you'll see here on the next slide, they range anywhere from a couple of hundred end users through to hundreds of thousands of users with our software. So a very diverse set of customers across various industries. And I think at this point, I'll wrap up and pass it off to my colleague Carolyn for any Q&A, and hopefully that was helpful in terms of understanding how Hitachi ID takes a unified approach to these problems.
Thanks, Colin. I am Carolyn with Hitachi ID. If you have any questions, please go ahead and send them through now. We'll try to get through all of them in the next few minutes, and if we do not have enough time, then we'll follow up with an email afterwards. Okay, so the first question here, I'm going to give this one to Shushmita. Why should I buy a unified solution? I only have a requirement for an identity governance product.
Sure, Carolyn. See, as I briefly touched upon during the discussion, right? Organizations are ever growing. You cannot actually predict where is the next journey that the organization is going into. There are always new opportunities, acquisitions that we talk about, venturing into new domains, which at any other given point in time or down the road will ask you for new access controls to be in place, or new regulatory compliances that need to be adhered to. Not only that, the threat landscape is also ever increasing, as we looked at, right? The number of compromised identities can actually lead to the overall security of your enterprise getting affected. So when you consider all of those points, there is never a requirement, or there is never a statement such as made like, I need only identity governance. You need identity governance product right now. So while choosing the governance product, if there is a little bit of analysis and due diligence that follows in, there is no harm in it. So that is the reason why before going in for any other solutions, even if it is the identity governance solution, go ahead with the unified solution, so that going forward, when the organization is moving into the other ventures, you don't have to take a step back and think, okay, now what? So that you are ready for the future.
Okay.
If I could add to that, just one of the cautions there. I mean, as you saw within Hitachi ID, we within our product suite, we have a unified approach, and certainly access governance has merits, but it also introduces risks in the sense that you're potentially working with stale data. You're largely working with CSV feeds. You're reviewing data that might be old in terms of access review, and you're triggering manual processes to change access based on potentially stale data. So having a bit more automation in play associated with your access governance program is healthy. It helps you mitigate some of that risk, enforce some of that policy more proactively, and less dependent on human input in terms of an access review. So something to consider. It certainly has some merits in terms of automation plus access governance will get you a better outcome. So
that makes sense for sure. For you, Colin, another question. I can only adopt identity access or privileged access management to begin with. Which should I adopt first?
Yeah, great question. And some of that kind of depends on what the situation of the customer looks like, what the environment looks like, what the risks are, what maybe compliance or audit requirements are driving that. But for us, I think the broader value would be in an identity management first approach, as some of the identity management processes that you can implement could tackle some of that privileged access risk initially, at least in terms of identifying the various different privileged access entitlements and being able to report and review and certify access to those entitlements, even though they continue to have access, persistent access in a privileged state. We could eventually kind of clean that up with a privileged access management program subsequently. But I think the best practice would be to lead with an identity management program that targets some of that privileged access risk as you go.
Okay, thank you. And one more question, Shushmita. Why would you say identity access management programs fail?
See, one of the important features or one of the important aspects of a failure would be if there is a poor technical architecture. meaning it is too complex without a need, as we were discussing in terms of unified solution and disparate solution, right? If you can go ahead and have a more simplified solution, which will make life easier for everyone, then why not? So if you are going in for technical architecture, which is way too complex, it adds to the burden of it. On the top of that, if there is no proper planning or a roadmap in place, solution is being or whether while a solution is being shortlisted in the first place. So a proper analysis has to be in place, as in terms of what exactly are my requirements. This is my as-is assessment. This is where I stand, and this is where I want to be. So to be, and that's when a roadmap has to be built from my to be to from my existing state to my to be state, and it has to be a phased approach. So if that sort of clarity is not present in terms of while deploying the solution, these kind of the IAM program is supposed to be failed. Also, there is this need and urgency that we have seen, that everybody needs too much too soon. Okay, I will do identity management also, access management also, PAM also. I just want to go ahead and do the whole thing on one shot, and I would like to see it working right from day one. So projects has to be treated as programs, and it has to be a phased approach so that all the nitty-gritties are taken into consideration before deciding on the rollout plan and rolling out the solution as such.
Okay, thank you. That is all we have time for right now for questions and answers. Back to you, Kalyani.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm happy that we are doing really good on time. So thank you everyone for joining us for today's session, and we hope that you are walking out of this webinar with an idea about what should be your organization's IAM roadmap. Right after this session, we will be sending across a mail to you with two links actually, which will allow you to register for exclusive demo and IAM assessment for your organization. Do register so that we can be a part of your IAM journey. With that, I would like to thank our speakers, Sushmita and Colin, for providing their valuable inputs. Carolyn, for making this webinar, so seamlessly, we launched it very seamlessly. And for you all, do not forget to check your mails and sign up for the demo assessment. Thank you, everyone. With that,
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.